Thank you. Could I ask those members who are leaving the chamber to please now do so quickly and quietly as we're moving on to the next item of business? And could I say to members not to stand in the aisle, please, chatting? Thank you. So the next item of business is a debate on motion 1667 in the name of Kate Forbes on achieving a fair balance in the UK's economy. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Minister Richard Lochhead to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 13 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. We are discussing the future of Scotland's economy today against a backdrop of international uncertainty. Indeed, right now it can feel like the world is walking backwards rather than striding confidently forward into better times. However, it is therefore more important than ever that we focus on how to improve the quality of life of the people of Scotland and make the most of the significant economic opportunities that Scotland enjoys, and indeed how we can contribute through realising those opportunities to the rest of the world as well. I want to begin today by affirming and celebrating Scotland's huge economic potential. Scotland consistently ranks as a top investment destination outside of London and the South East in the UK. We are world-leading in the development and deployment of renewables and green technology. We have some of the world's best universities, a world-class food and drink sector, a highly educated population and a diverse and open economy. Despite the challenges of 15 years of austerity from Westminster and of recovering from the economic impacts of Brexit and COVID, the Scottish economy is well placed to take advantage of the huge economic opportunities that come from the transition to net zero and the revolution in critical technologies as well. But realising the opportunities that lie ahead will require dynamic partnership between government, business and academia, and require government at every level to work towards common goals. We are at a moment of inflection for Scotland's economy, I believe. Get things right in the next few years and the prize for the people of Scotland and our country will be huge. More well-paid jobs, greater prosperity and greater tax revenues for our public services. We have opportunities to grab first-mover advantage in a number of areas and to solidify our progress in others, such as renewables or semiconductors or advanced manufacturing. But we're not the only country seeking to do this, and we need to ensure that these opportunities are not missed. Part of our strength in our diverse economy spread across all of our regions, and that is a key strength of our diverse economy, and we can take many examples of that. In 2021, Glasgow City Region produced approximately £48 billion of GVA, making it the largest city region economy in Scotland and the fourth largest in the UK overall. Edinburgh and South East Scotland is equally remarkable, producing 30% of Scotland's total economic output and ranking top out with London for investment and attractiveness in the UK. Aberdeen City and Shires work with Opportunity North East as a model of how the private sector can partner in regional structures. And, of course, I'm not just talking about city regions. In October, the South of Scotland region was designated as Scotland's Natural Capital Innovation Zone, recognising that they are ideally positioned to address the twin crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change through innovation and responsible investment. The Highlands and Islands Regional Economic...
Craig Hoy.
The Minister for giving way and making reference to the south of Scotland and particularly the south west of Scotland. Isn't he aware that what businesses such as Stena Sealing really want are roads that are fit for purpose in order to be able to move those vital commodities around our country?
Minister?
Roads, of course, are important, and all transport links are important as well. And the Scottish Government is doing all we can within our limited resources to push forward that agenda. It's a pity inflation has rocketed of all the materials to build roads with, thanks to the Conservative Party's budget a few years ago that caused inflation to rocket and the cost of everything to go through the roof, making it a lot challenging for both UK Government, Scottish Government and many other governments to deal with these issues. I should also talk about the Highlands and Islands Regional Economic Partnership, which includes 51% of Scotland's landmass, 99% of Scotland's community-owned land, more than 22,000 registered businesses and more than 1,200 social enterprises as well. And they have also undertaken work which points to tens of billions of potential investment that could come to the region in the years to 2040. Both Scottish and UK governments should be engaging and supporting them on this. Across our regions, Scotland also has huge opportunities in offshore wind, carbon capture, energy storage, hydrogen and decarbonisation of heat and transport. We also have a rapidly growing space technology sector, which is expected to be worth £4 billion by 2040. Digital technology is Scotland's fastest growing sector for inward investment, with excellent opportunities across cybersecurity, data, fintech, games, global business services and so many others. And as of 2021, we had over 10,000 registered businesses in the technology sector and 15,000 new graduates every year in digital technology fields from Scotland's universities. And according to the investment firm Buhurst, in 2021 there was a record £454 million of equity fundraising announced in Scotland's tech sector. Scotland also is one of the largest life sciences clusters in Europe, with around 770 life sciences organisations employing over 42,500 people. So we are committed to doing everything we can to support opportunities in these sectors, and of course we need the UK Government to match that as well. We welcome constructive partnerships working with the UK Government, and it's fair to say the current UK Government is more constructive than the previous Tory Government, but I think we have to be honest and say that was a very low bar. However, green free ports, a UK Government policy which was tailored and amended to fit the Scottish context, with their addition of Fair Work commitments, for example, is a positive example where even then we were able to work together on some issues. The Inverness and Cromarty Firth Green Freeport in turn will focus on the green industrial transition and has already seen a commitment of £350 million for Sumitomo for a subsea cable factory. In fact, the Green Freeport has ambitions to attract £6.5 billion of investment, resulting in over 11,000 jobs for the Highlands. And our Green Freeport in the Firth of Forth also has huge economic ambitions, looking to bring in £7.9 billion in investment and support over 34,000 jobs across the UK. The Forth Green Freeport also has a footprint in Grangemouth, of course, which is rightly the focus of a great deal of attention at the moment. And the First Minister recently announced a further £25 million of Scottish Government support for the just transition of the site, taking our total investment to £87 million. And we welcomed the Prime Minister's announcement of the availability of investment from the UK's National Wealth Fund, and we hope to hear more details of how that investment will be taken forward and support the cluster in due course. I must also repeat the call from the First Minister on carbon capture and storage at Grangemouth, as well as the UK Government recently announced support for the projects in Teesside and Merseyside. No green light has been offered for the project involving Grangemouth, despite promises from previous UK governments. Another positive example of collaboration working with the UK Government was through the city and regional growth deals. We currently have 12 growth deals in Scotland, with the Scottish Government total investment amounting to more than £1.9 billion, more than matching the UK Government's contribution of £1.5 billion. We are also working with the UK Government to deliver 2 investment zones in Scotland, in Glasgow region and the North East, which will be supported by up to £320 million of investment. So the prospects in Scotland are significant, and we are ready and willing to work with the UK Government to capitalise on the opportunities ahead of us. And where there are UK-wide schemes, we will work on delivering the Scottish end of those schemes as well. And I've given some examples where that's happened with the previous UK Government and the current one to some degree as well. However, the crux of this debate really is about recent signals from UK ministers which are causing concern in business groups and elsewhere, that the lion's share of investment and resources will disproportionately continue to be unfairly focused on London and the south east of England, or the so-called Golden Triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London. This is despite the fact that recent data shows that Scotland outperformed the UK in terms of economic growth last year. If we want to see greater investment into Scotland, we need our colleagues in Westminster to recognise the very significant opportunities that we have to offer here in Scotland. In January, the Chancellor of the Exchequer unveiled plans to deliver the Oxford-Cambridge Growth Corridor, stating the region was the home of British innovation. Well, as you can imagine, Deputy Presiding Officer, Scotland's reaction to that claim wasn't particularly positive. Our innovations in Scotland have shaped and advanced the world consistently, continually and remarkably. But even more importantly, we're home to the innovations that will shape the world of tomorrow. Then we recently had the Prime Minister's speech on the AI Opportunities Action Plan delivered at University College London, where he spoke about opportunities in Oxfordshire, Liverpool and Northumberland. In fact, he name-checked all 4 corners of England, but made no mention of Scotland, when he was delivering a high-profile, much-anticipated speech on the UK's AI Action Plan for the whole of the UK. Yep.
Mike Mara.
I wonder if he listened to the speech that the Prime Minister made in Glasgow just last weekend, when he announced £200 million of investment in Scotland, just a few days ago.
Minister.
I did, and I've already mentioned that in my speech, and welcomed it. And of course, that was after a bit of a backlash from indeed the local member, Labour Party member for Grangemouth as well. So hopefully we'll see the details of that investment sooner rather than later, because it's so important. But in terms of the AI announcement from the Prime Minister, which didn't mention Scotland, and the Labour members are shaking their heads, just for the records, that was despite the fact that 7 of our universities in Scotland have AI courses, with Edinburgh being a major hub for data and AI jobs in the UK, and consistently ranked amongst Europe's leading cities for data and AI capabilities. In fact, last year's Nobel Prize in Physics went to an alumni of the University of Edinburgh for outstanding work on machine learning. You don't need a quantum computer to see that the PM missed something quite important there, and should have, of course, perhaps mentioned Scotland and AI. And the Prime Minister pledged to increase the UK's computer capacity 20-fold by 2030, including building a new supercomputer, just months after the new UK government pulled back on plans to build a high-tech exascale supercomputer in Edinburgh. So, ignoring Scotland's leadership in AI and data in a speech about AI policy, claiming Oxford and Cambridge as the home of British innovation, saying the UK's new Silicon Valley should be in the so-called Golden Triangle and making that area the flagship of UK economic growth, these are all important insights into the UK government's mindset and priorities. We have to see more high-profile promotion of Scotland's innovation strengths from the UK government. We don't want Scotland to continually be an afterthought. The UK Government needs to work with us to drive investment into innovation in Scotland, not give disproportionate focus all the time to the South East. We have to look at how Scotch whisky, for instance, has also been treated. The decision to further increase duty on Scotch whisky is a broken promise from a Prime Minister who publicly committed to back Scotch producers to the hilt. Now, on top of that tax rise, of course, we heard last week that the UK Government was considering at the time allowing English whisky makers to use the term single malt, devaluing the products produced in Scotland. But of course now we've had an announcement that's not going to be happening, and we're pleased that the Labour Government has now dropped their plans for this after a big backlash from the Scotch whisky industry and of course pressure from the Scottish Government and many others as well. We need the UK Government to generally back, not undermine, our successful industries. The UK Government's recent Green Paper, Invest 2035, stated that the primary objective of the UK industrial strategy is to drive growth by taking advantage of the UK's unique strengths and untapped potential, enabling the UK's world-leading sectors to adapt and grow, and seizing opportunities to lead new sectors with high-quality, well-paid jobs. We, of course, welcome that. And we've got no doubt the UK Government is serious about that and its intention to translate that ambition into real and sustainable economic growth. But in order for that to happen, their ambition needs to be matched by commitment to collaboration and cooperation. They must develop their industrial strategy and determine their investments to deliver it. And in doing that, they must recognise Scotland's regional strengths and the catalytic opportunities that exist here in this country as well. They have to recognise the world-leading reputation of our universities in growth sectors such as advanced manufacturing, AI and life sciences. Again, the Labour members are laughing and shaking their heads. I spoke to a senior representative in the last couple of days from Scotland's university sector, and they said their hearts sank when they heard Rachel Reeves' speech about the Silicon Valley being in the south-east of England and about the growth corridor between Oxford and Cambridge as well, that being the solution to the UK's economic challenges. That's what's happening out there, and it would be really wise for Labour members to recognise what's happening out there and how people are responding to those announcements in the innovation community, the research community, the university communities and the wider business community as well, because they're very concerned by the tone and the mindset that's been echoed by all these speeches from UK politicians at the moment. We need our unique advantages in Scotland to be recognised and promoted. The Parliament must urge our colleagues in Westminster to ensure that decisions and the mechanisms of delivery respect evolution at the same time. They must work with us to leverage the power of our enterprise agencies and the regional structures already delivering in Scotland. So I just want to offer everyone across the Chamber who shares these ambitions the opportunity to work with the Government to attract investment, drive growth and deliver sustainable economic success, and to make sure that UK Government economic policy takes into account Scotland's massive economic opportunities as well. I move the motion.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Murdo Fraser to speak to and to move Amendment 1667.3. Around 9 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Presiding Officer. I think it's going to be a long afternoon, given what we've just heard. But I am pleased we're having another economy debate, the second economy debate in a week. And I hope that this trend will continue, because I like nothing more than discussing the Scottish and UK economies. And I'm going to enjoy these exchanges if we're going to have more of them. And in particular, I look forward to debating the vital role that UK government and UK government spending plays in supporting the Scottish economy. Now, in last week's debate, the Deputy First Minister accused me of being relentlessly negative, I think was the term that she used. Well, it sounds like today the tables are turned, Presiding Officer, because the relentless negativity is coming from the SNP front bench in terms of what the UK government has done. So I'd like to bring a little light and balance to the debate and some positivity for the benefit of the SNP front bench. Now, I should say I hold no candle for the current UK Labour government. I'll let my Labour colleagues opposite defend what the Labour government is doing. And indeed, given what I hear from the business community, their biggest concern is the introduction of the increase in employers' national insurance coming in just next month. But I'll let my Labour members refer to that point. I want to concentrate my efforts on what a Conservative government did over the previous 14 years from 2010 onwards. And I believe of course I'll give way.
Deputy First Minister.
I recognise that the member will want to set out what his government has done. Can I start by commending what his government did on announcing the supercomputer for the University of Edinburgh? Does he therefore share our negative disappointment about the decision of the subsequent government not to come true on that?
Murdo Fraser.
Yes, I would agree with the Deputy First Minister on that point, and there are a range of other issues and other projects that were being proposed by the former Conservative government, not least projects funded through the Towns Fund, affecting, for example, Dunfermline and Perth in my own region, where that funding has now been cancelled, and I think that's very, very, very regrettable. But let me talk about what the previous Conservative government did. But first of all, let's just put some of this into context, because the Barnett formula delivers, according to the Scottish Government's own Government Expenditure and Revenue Scotland figures, nearly £2,400 extra for every man, woman and child in Scotland, compared to what is spent elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And that is money that would not be available if this government got its way and separated us from the rest of the United Kingdom. And in addition, we saw a programme of direct investment in Scotland from the previous UK government. Direct investment totalling nearly £3 billion of UK government spending. We saw £1.5 billion investment in city, region and growth deals. Money coming into vital projects in Scotland, delivering key infrastructure, delivering projects, delivering innovation, delivering in the culture and tourism space. In my own region, I just mentioned two examples. The excellent new Perth Museum, drawing many more visitors than expected to the centre of Perth and hoping the local city centre economy, and showcasing the history of the city and the surrounding area, and of course home to the Stone of Destiny. And if members haven't visited the museum yet, I would encourage them to do that while they're there to spend some money. And the James Hutton Institute in Invergowrie, world-leading in terms of crop innovation, benefiting from growth deal investment, creating jobs and delivering world-beating science. And direct investment doesn't stop there. We've seen a further £1.4 billion in levelling up investment. We've seen the free ports that the Minister referred to. Now, of course, let's not forget, Presiding Officer, initially the Scottish Government were against the free ports, perhaps due to the influence of the anti-growth Greens who were in government at the time. Fortunately, the Deputy First Minister stepped in and good sense prevailed, and we now have the free ports, thank goodness. But that was a UK government, a UK Conservative government initiative. And then we saw the investment zones, and we've seen projects to regenerate town centres. And on top of that, we see vital local community projects being directly supported from levelling up funding for local sports clubs, funding for cultural projects, all benefiting from direct UK government investment. But I want to focus on two particular sectors this afternoon. The first is the defence sector, because the defence sector is relatively more important to the Scottish economy than it is to the UK as a whole. The defence sector employs more than 13,000 people in Scotland and accounts for £2 billion in economic turnover. That 13,000 employed in defence in Scotland is higher than the number of employees in London. The Ministry of Defence spends more per head in Scotland than the rest of the UK, an average of £380, higher than the UK average of £370. And that Ministry of Defence spend in Scotland grew 13% from 2018 to 21-22. And those jobs that are created by that defence spending tend to be highly skilled in sectors such as shipbuilding, engineering, science and technology. We saw the benefit of the spend on the 2 new UK aircraft carriers being built both on the Clyde and on the Forth, and Babcock in Rosyth in my region continues to benefit from the UK Government's shipbuilding programme. And looking at the uncertain world we now face, there will be a need recognised by the Prime Minister to increase our defence spending. Already that's been signalled. I expect we will have to go yet further. That is a tremendous opportunity for Scotland in terms of supporting our economy, developing skills, providing careers and opportunities to expand on what is already a very successful defence sector where we lead the world with some of the technology. If we look, for example, at Leonardo providing radar systems for Lockheed Martin being sold across the world, supporting thousands of jobs here in the Scottish economy. So it should have the wholehearted support of every party in this chamber. And of course it only happens because of UK government spend. Scotland is benefiting from that spend. And if that spend is going to increase, Scotland will benefit even more from that, and it will need a positive engagement from the Scottish Government to make sure it happens. A celebration of the defence sector, which frankly too many colleagues in this chamber seem to be embarrassed about. Now, yesterday, when the First Minister was making his statement on Ukraine, he spoke positively about the opportunities for defence in Scotland. I wish that positivity was reflected in all the SNP backbenches. Unfortunately, too many seem ashamed of our defence sector. And some of us will remember that dreadful event that took place more than a year ago in this Parliament, when we had young apprentices coming from the defence industries who were subject to abuse and being heckled as they arrived simply because of the sector in which they worked. That was a disgraceful and shocking set of scenes, being cheerleaded by a member of this Parliament from the Green Party. And frankly, Presiding Officer, that was disgraceful. And I think if we are going to see more opportunities from the defence sector, we in this Parliament have to be positive about it. Otherwise, we're not going to see young people encouraged to take up apprenticeships, which are so vital. So I hope we'll have some leadership from the SNP around this issue. We've already seen, for example, the entire Royal Navy submarine fleet relocating to the Clyde, bringing with it jobs. There will be other opportunities for Scotland too, but we have to make sure the Scottish Government is welcoming of those new jobs and that investment. And let me mention just one more sector, Presiding Officer, which is energy. We are seeing huge investment at present. We were debating this just yesterday afternoon. Huge investment in green technologies and the renewable energy sector. Very welcome, Presiding Officer, and funded by electricity bill payers right across the United Kingdom. It is the UK energy market that provides the money we need to see the huge developments, particularly in offshore wind, driving economic regeneration in the Highlands and right across other parts of Scotland. So it is UK government support underpinning the regulatory framework that makes sure that those jobs are coming and developing a new economy for the future. It's just a pity, as I highlighted last week, and indeed came up yesterday's debate as well, that the anti-nuclear stance of this SNP government means we cannot benefit from jobs in that sector in addition. And in that same vein, Presiding Officer, we need to ensure a viable future for oil and gas. Labour have already set their face against oil and gas. The SNP equivocate when it comes to Rosebank and Jackdaw, the new oil fields that are being proposed. We in the Scottish Conservatives are very clear. We need to continue with the extraction of oil and gas from the North Sea, not least to provide energy security and reduce our reliance on imports. And we should have a UK government that is supportive of that approach. So, Presiding Officer, in conclusion, I would say there is much to celebrate in terms of the record of the previous UK government in investing directly in the Scottish economy. And there are great opportunities for the future. Great opportunities in energy, great opportunities in defence. We should be seizing these opportunities for Scotland and not carping from the sidelines. These are the points made in my amendment, Presiding Officer, which I am very pleased to move. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Fraser. I now call on Michael Mara to speak to and move Amendment 1667.1. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I move the amendment in my name. I have to say it's with some genuine disappointment that I read the motion today that we've been asked to discuss. And I have to say that the first half of the Minister's opening speech I agreed with almost every single word. The huge potential in our economy in Scotland, the vast opportunities in innovation, the strength of many of our university sector and the knowledge that is learnt there. At the moment, too many of them weakened, I'm afraid, by the 22% real terms cuts in funding for Scottish students and the financial situation that many of them are continuing to find themselves in. But I would say the second half of the Minister's speech was far below par in that regard. And it was a sad indication, I think, of a lack of a change of mindset on behalf of the governing party, who frequently tell me they have seen a transformation in the attitude of UK government over recent months in terms of the ability and the willingness to work together. When I speak to members of the UK Cabinet Presiding Officer, they say to me they just think that they're doing their jobs. Now, the comparison to that is the predecessors who frankly weren't. It's about working together and making sure that we can actually have the best interests of Scotland ahead of us. Because last July, the whole of Scotland, frankly, voted to put years of grievance and division behind us. They rejected the symbiotes of shared grievance who are invested in mutual failure and rancour. And I would suggest that this debate today is frankly timely, because it gives a very good example in just the last 2 hours about what can be done. In the last 2 hours, the UK Labour Government announced a major investment of over £55 million in the port of Cromarty Firth. And that will drive growth and create hundreds of jobs in floating offshore wind. The expansion of that port is to make it the first port able to make floating offshore wind turbines on site and at scale in the UK. Exactly the kind of first mover advantage that the Minister stood up and said that we should be taking as a country and as an economy here in Scotland, certainly.
Minister.
I'm pleased the member agreed with 50% of my speech. I'd be very worried if he'd agreed with 100% of the speech. But when he reflects on how his own party's plummeted to around 18% in the opinion poll since the UK elections in July, and he reflects on the fact that the UK Chancellor has said that the key to UK economic growth is to focus on the south east of England, Oxford and Cambridge and London, does he agree with that philosophy from the UK Chancellor?
Michael Mara.
I simply don't recognise that description of the Chancellor's approach, and I can set out exactly why that is. If the Chancellor is the Chancellor of the whole of the UK, making speeches in different locations across the country, she won't continually and constantly be speaking about Scotland. Clearly, that's the role of ministers here. It's right that she supports Scotland and does that work, and I'm going to set out exactly how. No, thank you, sir. Let me set out to you in some detail, because that investment, the investment I've just talked about, will support up to 1,000 skilled jobs in construction, installation and operation of offshore floating wind. But far from deprioritising Scotland, as the Minister is suggesting, we have put it front and centre of the UK Labour Government's economic plans and the clean energy mission that is defining so much of the animating purpose of the Scottish economy. And that's what's clear to me when I speak to businesses across Scotland. It's that mission that is driving their focus, their investment globally, and what they're doing as businesses here in Scotland. Let's have some further examples. The budget boost of an additional £5.2 billion for Scotland. £60 billion is the largest settlement in the history of devolution. More money for public services and for infrastructure, and all of that helps our economy to grow. A further £1.4 billion in local growth. No, thank you, sir. £1.4 billion in local growth projects. At least £200 million for specific Scottish towns, including £20 million for growth and regeneration in my home city of Dundee. And just last month, I was with the Secretary of State for Scotland at the V&A in Dundee, announcing another £2.6 million of funding there, which will help drive the city economy with tourist footfall and keep the Dundee tills ringing. £200 million announced just a few days ago from the National Wealth Fund to secure the future of the Grangemouth economy. Significant investment announced by the Prime Minister in Scotland, talking about Scotland and Scottish jobs and answering the call for government to support the workers in that area. £125 million for Great British Energy, headquartered in Aberdeen, helping to attract investment for our clean energy future in the nation's and Europe's energy capital. £25 million for the 10-year investment in the Argyll and Butte City and Growth deal, and much, much more. But we have to also be clear that none of this was inevitable. In the debate that we had last week about the budget and the budget process, if you can't just will the ends, you have to will the means. The taxes that we often discuss in here are the cost of actually being able to invest in our economy. And the scale of the mess of the public finances have made some of these decisions difficult. Labour inherited not just a black hole, but public services in crisis and zero growth in an economy that had flatlined for over a decade. And it was the disastrous, inept Tory government that frankly had made many, many promises of the kinds that were to Scottish towns and areas they had no intention of keeping whatsoever. And the evidence of that, Presiding Officer, is the fact they had spent the annual National Reserve 3 times over in the first quarter of the year. So these were difficult decisions in terms of how we raise the money, but it's right that we invest. And I know that UK Labour Government colleagues stand ready to work in partnership with the Scottish Government and other stakeholders to deliver for the people of Scotland. And that has been very clearly demonstrated, as I started to set out, in the first 8 months, only 8 months of this Labour Government. But will they find that willing partner in the Scottish Government? It doesn't sound by the tone of much of what the Minister had to say that that will be the case. And I would suggest, Presiding Officer, that the SNP Government should start in part by putting its own house in order when it talks about investment. And we can look to the report from the investor panel that was commissioned by the Scottish Government. I wouldn't expect, when they were expecting to get the report back, that it would be quite so excoriating. The report found, and I quote, "few visible opportunities for scale investment. Planning decisions are slow and sit in the system for unacceptably long periods." We could illustrate that, Presiding Officer, by talking about Berwick Bank, now just past its 2nd-year anniversary for permitting sitting on the desks of the Scottish Government, and the huge impediment that it means for the investment in the supply chain in Scotland, with this kind of signal investment opportunity being potentially squandered. They go on, the investor panel. It is not apparent that the Scottish Government considers the impact of its actions on investment appetite. All of this, a damning indictment of the prevailing approach of the Government, if we can call it that, an approach from the Government as a whole. We also can look at their approach to the housing market and other areas. But today's grievance motion comes to us from an era that I believe should have ended last July. The UK Labour Government, with Scottish Labour MPs at its heart, is possible because the people of Scotland willed it so. Today's announcement on the port of Cromarty Firth only serves to underline that. The Government stands ready to work with the Scottish Government, and rightly so, for the good of Scotland's economy and its people. And it's for the SNP to decide whether they want to do that or they want to retreat back into the grievance, chaos and decline that I hope we said goodbye to last year.
Thank you, Mr Marra. I now call on Lorna Slater to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With respect to the motion under debate just now, we all know that with London stripped out of the economic data, the performance report for the UK looks quite different. Suddenly, a lack of investment generally on anything north of Cambridge becomes visible, and the signs of the regions dealing with the endemic poverty ground into place during the Thatcher years becomes obvious. But if we are to speak about really rebalancing the economy, both Scotland and the wider UK have a bigger challenge ahead of them. The fever smell in the air, the sound on the wind, is a drive for growth, because growth is magically going to solve all of our problems, right? Never minding that the USA, which has shown the largest growth for the longest time, has lower life expectations, more citizens who don't have access to health care, high maternal mortality, more violent crime and poorer work-life balance than European countries with lower rates of growth. The US child poverty rate is more than double that of the UK, Sweden and France. The average American has a carbon footprint of around 16... In just a moment, let me finish this sentence. The average American has a carbon footprint of around 16 tonnes, which is one of the highest in the world. The average European has a carbon footprint of around 7.25 tonnes. So clearly, growth isn't everything. Mr Hoy.
Craig Hoy.
I thank the member for giving way. Could you explain what the causal link is between economic growth and violent crime?
Lorna Slater.
The causal link between a focus on economic growth instead of inequality is a result in crime. We know that societies that have gross inequality, like America, have more crime. Where societies are more equal, where people feel that they have a greater opportunity in life, as in Europe, as in European countries that have higher taxes and more opportunity for people, there is lower crime. The member is shaking his head at me, but crime rates in Europe are lower than that in America. And that inequality that we see in America is part of that story. Growth isn't everything. It doesn't solve all your problems. And even when you have high growth, you still have to have redistributive taxation, including wealth taxes, and you have to invest money in public services and in reducing carbon emissions. Morris Obstfeld, former chief economist of the IMF, wrote yesterday in the Financial Times in an article on the ills of the American economy. Appropriate economic policies to help America. Better targeted policies could include a more redistributive tax system, limits to corporate power, further healthcare reform, and workforce development. So it doesn't matter if you have the highest growth in the world, you still need to do those things. Even with lower growth, such as Germany and Japan had between 1980 and 2023, GDP per capita grew by 1.4 and 1.5 respectively, compared to America's 1.8. With this lower growth, Germany and Japan managed to provide full coverage public health care, have lower poverty rates, and significantly greater longevity. The differences in outcome for these countries is down to the policy choices they are making, not down to how much growth they have or have not achieved. To rebalance the economy, we need to be clear about what we are trying to achieve. Increasing pollution, cutting back on the social safety net, cutting back healthcare and benefits might increase your GDP number, but at what cost? The cost of lives cut short, of health ruined, and of creating damage to the environment that can't be undone or that will be very costly to reverse, at the cost of allowing the rich to get richer while the poor get poorer. When you take the costs for essentials out of the public domain and put them into the private domain, inevitably the rich can buy them and the poor cannot. This is sometimes called cost savings, but an essential service is not optional. People who are forced through poverty to go without heat, without timely health care, without good quality education and training, without good quality food, still need those things, and they take harm from not having them. Even if the heartless discount the cost of human suffering, they cannot discount the cost to society. Poverty is expensive. People who experience poverty have higher mental and physical medical needs and are able to contribute less due to lower achievements in work and study. We hear a lot of nonsense about this or that public service or benefit being unaffordable. Rubbish. What we can't afford is billionaires. We can't afford to let a few individuals hoard the wealth of millions. The rebalancing of the economy that I would like to see would be away from enriching a few people while constantly whittling away at the services that everybody else needs. It would be away from subsidizing polluters and high-emission industries and investing that money into environmentally sustainable sectors. And it would be away from a fanatical obsession with GDP growth and onto a broader focus, ensuring that everyone in society can thrive. History will tell the tale in the end, but I'm sure that the lurch to the far right in America, the distrust of institutions and even of democracy that has led to the second election of Donald Trump is, at least in part, due to the disconnect that Americans feel about the story they're being told about their economy. Look at that growth! And the reality they face every day in not being able to get affordable, good quality healthcare, food, education or public services. We need to rebalance the economy toward ordinary people, taxing extreme wealth and the pollution that the very wealthy produce at a rate far exceeding what any ordinary person can. Private jets, luxury cars, frequent flying. We need the UK to remove the subsidies and tax breaks for high-polluting industries, crack down on tax avoidance and ensure that global corporations pay their taxes and their employees properly. In summary, Presiding Officer, to rebalance our economy, we need to defund the billionaires.
Thank you, Ms Slater. And I now call on Beatrice Wishart to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The motion makes an important point about ensuring that investment does not unfairly focus in one area. I understand the sentiment contained in the motion, and while I realise the point that it's trying to make, I would observe that many of my constituents consider the Central Belt of Scotland as often the national focus of this SNP government. Much of what I'm about to say will focus on the islands. Visitors often remark how much enterprise there is throughout the Northern Isles. Regardless of size, there's an enormous enterprise driven in part by geography and a can-do attitude. Look no further than Scotland's growing space sector. Situated right at the top of the UK, UNST is hosting Europe's first fully licensed vertical launch spaceport at Saxiford, well placed for low Earth orbit satellite launches. Its development grew from the vision of an entrepreneur who recognised the potential of the location and, with support from the community and local authority, has made it happen. The spaceport recently gained a significant endorsement by way of rocket manufacturer Orbex, moving from the Scottish Government-backed Sutherland spaceport to Saxiford. Shetland's at the heart of energy generation, whether it's oil and gas that's contributed enormously to the wider economy or new technologies in renewables like wind or tidal. One of the world's most successful wind farms, Borrowdale, is in Shetland. In Orkney, EMEC has attracted for the last 20 years wave and tidal developers from around the world. Often glossed over is the contribution women make to the economy, but in this week of International Women's Day, I will not. In my constituency, the long history of Fair Isle knitwear has global reach. Today we see innovation from new designers who have modernised the world-renowned product, like French textile artist Marie Bruhat, who has made her home in Fair Isle. And there's production from local factories who export to the Far East. Orkney fashion designer Kirstine Stewart said in an interview she was inspired by the island's female role models to build her successful fashion and design business. Women's enterprise putting the Northern Isles on the map. Presiding Officer, the Northern Isles can contribute even more to the national economy with investment in infrastructure that on mainland Scotland is taken for granted. Ferries are our roads, and tunnels should be considered national infrastructure and not simply just as a link for those who live on the islands. Tunnel action groups from UNST and Yell have instructed Norwegian consultants to carry out sonar investigations to progress the ambition of a tunnel network in the North Isles. Funds for this have been raised through private donations, not public money, and the final report should contribute to the determination of potential tunnel alignments. Another demonstration of the can-do and enterprising attitude, recognising where the future lies. This is important in order to speed up delivery of time-sensitive seafood products, including from the growing salmon industry. That's another example of rural and island enterprise. When crofters decades ago started small-scale salmon farming, it's now a multi-million-pound industry reaching markets far beyond our shores and contributing to Scotland's economy. The UK Government committed levelling up funding for a new Fair Isle ferry and harbour infrastructure, but the external ferry service between Shetland and Aberdeen is under considerable pressure and disruption. While weather and pump room flooding may not have been foreseen, the annual dry dock periods are known, yet little is done to ensure that there's any kind of backup resilience to ensure businesses and passengers are not left on the quayside. Digital connectivity across Scotland lags in the areas furthest away from our major cities, yet it's essential in order to conduct business today. Radio Teleswitch is the latest example of a raw deal for rural and island Scotland, areas of high fuel poverty and poor weather causing concern and alarm in my constituency as the fundamentals of heating technology changes. There's a lack of forthcoming answers from the industry, and there's no pragmatic can-do attitude forthcoming to resolve this for rural and island Scotland. And there are many more examples, but with limited time I will conclude. Scotland is overly centralised, and that has got worse over the last 18 years. Island and rural communities are too often at the back of the queue, and the failure to provide the core connections they need, broadband, ferries, tunnels, roads, is holding back their economies and businesses. It's important that they are given better infrastructure and more power so Scotland can reach its potential in renewables, food and drink, forestry, tourism and other critical industries rooted in rural and remote areas. It's time the Scottish Government faced up to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. We will now move to the open debate. I would just take this opportunity to advise members that, in fact, in terms of the SNP speakers this afternoon, one of the speakers had to pull out at the last minute in light of illness. So what has been agreed is that 2 of the 3 shall have 9 minutes and the third one shall have 6. And with that, I call Kevin Stewart to be followed by Finlay Carson. Up to 9 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And Scotland has extraordinary economic potential. We have been inventors in the past, we have innovated in oil and gas, and we have key sectors such as renewables, food and drink, tourism and high technology research that would do even better if investment was put into play by the UK Government. But let's look at the current situation in terms of regional inequity in the UK. And while the subject of economic regional inequity in the UK can descend into heated public debate, what is not up for debate is the plain facts. And for those facts, we need to turn to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, whose data should be beyond political debate. And it comes as no surprise to me that according to OECD official data, the UK ranks 27th out of 31 countries for income equality. Quite simply, the UK is a country where the top 10% are lapping it up, while the rest of us are falling behind. And this by itself is shameful, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Inequality in the UK also occurs at a regional and national level. And again, we can turn to the OECD for the plain facts. Greater London ranks 11th out of 419 regions in the OECD database in terms of GDP per capita. But the median UK region only ranks at 179. This gulf between London and the rest of us is not by accident. We have been told for years that a pound spent in Croydon is worth more than a pound spent in Scotland. A Boris Johnson catchphrase, if I remember rightly. And we have been promised that... I'll give way to Craig Hoy.
Craig Hoy.
I thank Mr Stewart for giving way, and is he aware that one of the engines of the London economy is the financial services sector? So would he therefore take the advice of Scottish Financial Enterprise and urge his government to cut income tax in Scotland to recruit some of those skilled workers to Scotland so we could help grow at a similar pace to the rest of the UK?
I was just going to come to the London financial sector, funnily enough, because we've been promised that Scotland's wealth flowing south to be invested in London would pull the rest of us up. And that thanks to the broad shoulders of the UK, we'd all march into the sunlit uplands of imperial splendour. But the exact opposite has happened. Since Thatcher began the campaign of using Scotland's wealth to turn the City of London into a global financial centre, the Cold War has ended, and we have watched the Iron Curtain fall. However, it is the small Eastern European nations that strode onto the world stage as independent countries that are marching to the sunlit uplands and not the UK nations and regions. The GDP per capita of the median UK nation and region now sit snugly between the median regions in the former Eastern Bloc countries of Lithuania and Slovenia. And it's a plain fact that over the past decades, we have been dragged down while those independent European nations have pulled themselves up. However, the new Labour UK government, rather than accepting that the policy of London and the South East First has failed, are just as determined as Thatcher to continue down the path of failure that will see Scotland's potential continue to be smothered. What Thatcher began with miners and steelworkers, Starmer is determined to finish with oil and gas workers, with little investment in a just transition. Last year, we began with a promise of £28 billion of investment in the new green economy. However, the investment and the jobs that go with it have disappeared like sna off a dike. And the much-vaunted GB Energy commitment to Aberdeen has now been reduced to a shared office and the promise of a few hundred jobs to arrive sometime in the next 20 years. And of course, we can ask, where is the money for the Acorn carbon capture and storage project? Meanwhile, investment in London continues apace, with a total UK capital spending per person in London of £2,237 last year, compared to £1,789 in Scotland. Can we really be surprised that decades of starving investment in Scotland to fund even higher spending in the London bubble results in London increasing its lead at the expense of Scotland? And while the data from the OECD is undeniable in showing that years of investment in London has not served Scotland or other UK nations and regions well, it doesn't tell us why. For that, we need to look at the factors of production, which include land, labour and capital. Quite simply, land and labour in London are among the most expensive in the world. And this requires ever-increasing amounts of capital investment to compensate. That's vital capital investment not going to actually grow the economy, but simply to cancel out the negative factors of costly land and labour. And this is because, fundamentally, London doesn't have the land to support its economy, and every natural resource, from energy to food and water, must be shipped into London from somewhere else. Given that Scotland is the source of much of the natural resources used by London, London is benefiting from our fruits of production in a way that we are not. And of course, it gets worse year upon year, with every bit of growth eked out of London making the resource deficit worse. Now, we can debate the historic merit, although I'd rather not, of investing in London during the days of empire, but either way, those days are gone now, and it's clear that for many years, investing in London in the South East has been a long-term drag on Scotland and other UK nations and regions. And given that, how much better would it not be to use our own fruits of production to grow our economy here in Scotland? I understand that the long-term steady growth here in Scotland isn't that attractive to politicians in the Westminster bubble, with their eyes on the imperial capital, the next election, and their desperation to stay in their jobs. For them, the quick buck of throwing ever-increasing amounts of money into London in the South East is much more attractive. But that's exactly why we are in the position that we are. Years of Westminster short-termism causing long-term pain for no gain. Presiding Officer, it's time for independence.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I now call Finlay Carson to be followed by Faisal Chowdhury. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we all know, down the centuries, Scotland has produced an army of great inventors whose boundless imagination and inspiration has set us apart from everybody else. From the television, penicillin, tidal energy, turbines, Dolly the sheep, not to forget the telephone or the regrettable deep-fried Mars bar. Scots are responsible for the ATMs as well as daily disposable contact lenses, the blast furnace, the steam hammer and threshing machines, to name a few. Scotland has always been at the forefront of world-class innovation. So I agree that we must do all in our power to ensure that this amazing trend continues, which of course means greater resources must be found for education. Our colleges and universities, where often groundbreaking ideas are spawned and hopefully ultimately brought to life. Like my colleague Murdo Fraser, please forgive me for not shouting from the rafters regarding the woeful performance of the current Labour government, whose pre-election promises are simply turning to dust. Which is a great pity, given the vital role that the UK government plays in supporting the Scottish economy, or it certainly did when the previous Conservative government was in power. Craig Hoy has already mentioned it, and no doubt you're aware that I've been campaigning relentlessly for the A75 and A77 upgrades. These are two of the most critical roads in the country, responsible for transporting over £6 billion worth of trade between the UK and Ireland and beyond every year. Since devolution, it's sadly been neglected for investment by the Scottish Government, and it was only under the Conservatives that £8 million on the back of Sir Peter Hendy's connectivity review, a review which incidentally the SNP Government refused to take part in, unlike the other devolved administrations and indeed the Republic of Ireland. But out of all the roads in the UK, the review highlighted the importance of the A75. And while Labour does commendably remain committed to improving the A75, it's trimmed down the initial investment to £5 million, which I suppose is better than nothing, particularly considering the SNP Government's lack of anything, despite infrastructure being a devolved matter. Often dubbed the forgotten or ignored corner of Scotland, the South West benefited enormously under the previous UK Government, in particular through the levelling up schemes that saw projects in Scotland share £122 million of funding. Indeed, nearly £23 million was invested in the south of Scotland, while an additional £14 million will go towards improving transport links in Dumfries and Galloway, new EV chargers for cars and electric buses, while new transport hubs will be created in 5 towns in the region. Previously, the scheme saw £343 million earmarked to Scotland in previous rounds, meaning a total of £465 million has been allocated. In addition, 12 projects within Dumfries and Galloway benefited from £3 million as part of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The late First Minister Alex Salmond promised £8 million of investment in Stranraer during a visit to the new port at Cairnryan. And in 2016, former Cabinet Secretary and MSP for the South of Scotland, Aileen MacLeod, committed to prioritising the A75 and A77 before losing her seat. Regrettably, these election promises have failed to materialise, and despite similar more recent promises from the SNP Government, it's only now going to materialise again after a funding commitment in the previous session from the UK Conservative Government. Some £18 million will now be spent regenerating the underused waterfront at Stranraer to create a vibrant marine leisure destination, thanks mostly to the Borderlands Inclusive Growth Deal funding, which totals at £450 million. It's also hoped that the Stranraer and Cairnryan area could capitalise on the Northern Ireland Enhanced Investment Zone, which aims to provide grants and tax breaks to a region, again an initiative of the previous UK Government. It's crucial to recognise that Scotland already enjoys significant autonomy in economic development. The Scottish Government has the power to tailor policies and investment to suit the unique needs of the Scottish economy. This autonomy does allow Scotland to leverage its strength in sectors such as renewable energy, life sciences and fintech, and should ensure that these industries receive the attention and support they deserve. The motion sadly focuses on regional investment, and it risks creating a division that puts different parts of the UK against each other, which of course is par for the course for this nationalist government. So instead of fostering unity and collaboration, it can only lead to a fragmented approach to economic development. We must remember that the strength of the UK economy lies in its diversity and interconnectivity. By working together and sharing resources, we can achieve a more balanced and prosperous economy for all. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, the latest survey carried out with the South of Scotland Enterprise involved more than 600 businesses, revealed that the biggest challenge facing them was the economic uncertainty, which is influencing some decisions around investment and growth. And a significant reason for that uncertainty is the ongoing constitutional grievance which this nationalist SNP government continues to peddle in ridiculous debates such as this. Can I suggest that both the UK and the Scottish Government would do well to follow examples set by the previous Conservative UK Government if they want to see the Scottish economy grow and high-growth sectors continue to prosper?
Thank you, Mr Carson. I now call Faisal Chowdhury to be followed by George Adam. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm disappointed that the Scottish Government has chosen to bring forward this motion based on selection of recent UK government announcements and chosen to play a blame game rather than working collaboratively with the Labour government in Westminster to deliver positive changes for Scotland. I do not disagree with the premises that for too long wealth and investment has been concentrated in the southeast of England. We should be looking to ensure all areas of the UK benefit from growth, especially Scotland. And devolution itself is a key mechanism to achieve that. In last week's debate on investment, members, including myself, discussed the importance of investment in infrastructure, including housing and transport, as a catalyst for growth. And many of the announcements made by the UK government were in these very areas, like transport and housing. So the Scottish Government's motion is more confusing, given it has control of these areas. So I would repeat my remark that if we... let me go through... I have a lot to go through. So I would like to repeat my remark that if we want to have growth, we need investment and infrastructure. And the Scottish Government should show ambition to use the power it has in these areas. But regardless of recent news in England, we have to be clear that the Labour government in Westminster values Scotland, has invested in Scotland and made it clear they intend to continue, with £200 million invested into Grangemouth, securing the future of the site and retraining workers, over £125 million for Great British Energy, creating jobs with offices in Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen, a National Wealth Fund which meets our strategic goal by de-risking private investment, has just made its first investment in Scotland. Both the Minister for Technology and the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer have said Glasgow could be an AI growth zone. On a similar scale, North Edinburgh Arts is, in a smaller scale, North Edinburgh Arts is receiving money from the Community Ownership Fund, creating a community hub which will contain council services, spaces for artists and cafes. And of course, today, Minister rejected an English bid to change the definition of single malt whisky. These are not the actions of a government which considers Scotland to be an afterthought. And the SNP, when this investment in Scotland was put to vote in the UK budget, voted against. But government investment alone is not enough to deliver economic growth. Our planning system must be reformed to expedite the progress of application and get businesses building, not waiting. The Scottish Government's investors panel were clear that unacceptable delays in the planning system are making investment more uncertain and increasing cost, contributing to the perception that Scotland is not just not open for business. and issues with planning contribute to the housing emergency, which is eating away the disposal income of public, who are spending more and more of their salary renting or saving, rather than boosting other areas of our economy. Lastly, I want to touch on another issue raised by the investor panel, and that is the current landscape for attracting private investors, which is cluttered with various government agencies with different roles and funds. Our investment agencies should be easy to access and involve businesses in strategy and decision-making, with a pipeline of projects ready for private investment. Ultimately, members will repeat the strength of Scotland, and we are right to be proud of our advantages. But we need to see these strengths put to work and deliver economic growth. Because regardless of any recent UK government moves, Scotland has lagged the rest of the UK in growth for 10 years. So the Scottish Government should be focusing on tackling the issues we face, rather than bickering with UK Labour government that is interested in investing and collaborating with Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on George Adam to be followed by Douglas Ross. Around 9 minutes. Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm happy to stand here for 9 minutes and talk about how the imbalance in our economy affects the people of Paisley and Scotland in general. But just to say a few points at the very beginning is, my politics doesn't come from, it's not the politics of grievance, as others have said. Why I get angry and disappointed is because I have been here long enough in this place, and I've been involved in politics long enough to see that UK governments come and go, they promise the earth and they never deliver for Scotland. We end up hearing about golden triangles for Oxford, Cambridge and London. We hear about other areas that can get the investment, but it never seems to be in our areas, in our communities. And that's why our focus should be here as well. So it's more disappointment than actual politics of grievance. And today's debate, Presiding Officer, is a matter of fundamental importance. The economic imbalance in the UK and the urgent need for Scotland's vast potential to be recognised and fully supported is important for us all, whether it be in Paisley or in the rest of Scotland. Scotland's economy is rich in innovation, industry and ingenuity, yet time and again Westminster neglects our contributions and stifles our opportunities. The UK Government continues to pour resources into the so-called Golden Triangle, Oxford, Cambridge and London, and leaving Scotland as an afterthought. And this has to change. The Minister, Richard Lochhead, was right when he said there's much uncertainty in the world. And it's my belief, and I believe it's his belief, that now's the time for us to grab that opportunity. It's for us here in this Scotland to make sure that Scotland doesn't miss these opportunities that are available. And I believe the UK has failed Scotland now and in the past, and it will continue to do so. But I'm willing to work with anyone that can actually make that difference, because this is about people's jobs and their future financial stability. So I will work with anyone, and I know the Scottish Government thinks as well. When we hear about Oxford, Cambridge and London, it's highly concerning to someone like me who's heard this all before. I've heard it a million times before, where once again investment gets taken away from Scotland as the UK focuses on down south. And we need to focus on excellence up here in Scotland and what we can provide. And most of all, you know, I can talk about locally Paisley International Airport, otherwise known to others as Glasgow International Airport. What is one of the clearest examples of how we can move things forward? The future of Grangemouth could be a hub for sustainable aviation fuel. Happy to do so.
Paul O'Kane.
Very grateful to the member for taking an intervention, and he knows that I also represent the community to which he refers, including Glasgow Airport. Does he share my concern that it's possible to get a direct train from Glasgow Central Station to Manchester Airport, but you can't get a direct train to Glasgow Airport, and that is significantly challenging in terms of the growth we need in our area?
George Adam.
Currently, I never noticed the member at the recent SBT Clyde Metro Hub meeting, but they're working on that for the future as we speak. So, you know, this is about the positive way of looking at the future. Let's leave the negativity to those that can behind and actually look at how we can do it. The future for Grangemouth is as a hub for sustainable aviation fuel, and it's one of the clearest examples of the economic imbalance is the lack of the UK Government investment in Grangemouth. Here we have an industrial site primed to become a leader in sustainable aviation. Fuel production studies have confirmed that Grangemouth is ideally placed to support this transition, yet Westminster has focused its funding efforts elsewhere. If you're Old Trafford, Manchester United, you can get £1 billion for redevelopment, but nothing for the people of Grangemouth. And I wonder if Mr Mara would want to answer that.
Michael Mara.
It's quite bizarre that he might have missed the earlier speeches where he exchanged with the Minister the fact that just last week an additional £200 million was announced to support the people of Grangemouth. Does he call that nothing?
George Adams.
I will just say £1 billion to Ineos, the owner of Ineos in Manchester United, and also £600 million to place in Belgium. Come on, who is on the side of the people of Grangemouth here? It's definitely not the Labour Party. But when we're talking about the transport infrastructure, we need to make sure that Glasgow Airport is part of that sustainable aviation fuel future. And that is the reason why we need to be looking at Grangemouth as that site. Because, presiding officer, you know, sustainable aviation fuel produces up to 70% less carbon. And as such, it gives us the opportunity, and it's made from waste materials from such household waste as agricultural residues, used cooking oils, as well as green hydrogen. So that's why Grangemouth is perfectly sited for that site as well. And that's why, well, 200 million, you know, there's people shouting, presiding officer, from the side, and they're almost as irrelevant as some of the things that they've actually tried to provide. I bring it back to the focus of £1 billion to a Chancellor who is shutting down Grangemouth, as opposed to the actual people who we're trying here to represent. So with the right bracking, presiding officer, Grangemouth could supply the aviation industry with sustainable fuel, strengthening the role of Glasgow Airport and reinforcing Scotland's commitment to net zero. But instead, we have a Labour UK government following the footsteps of the Tories of over-promising and under-delivering for Scotland. And that is why, in the SNP, we will continue to demand investment that Scotland deserves. Innovation in Paisley, as everyone will know, I'm always the first to tell them that, and UWS has research and economic growth as one of their prime ideas. So Paisley is not just a town of heritage and history, it is a centre of innovation, and the University of the West of Scotland is leading the way in cutting-edge technology and research. Professor Naeem Ramzan of University School of Computing, Engineering, Physical Sciences, I met in a recent visit, and some of the work they're doing there is incredible. So let's invest in that excellence and what they're doing. Let me highlight one such innovation that UWS researchers have developed: artificial intelligence technology capable of rapidly detecting serious health conditions from X-ray images. Originally designed to detect COVID-19, this AI can now identify TB, pneumonia and even certain cancers with remarkable accuracy. This breakthrough could revolutionise healthcare, not just in Scotland, but worldwide, reducing pressures on our NHS and improving outcomes for patients. Additionally, UWS partnership with Kibble is delivering pioneering remote health monitoring, providing real-time support for vulnerable young people in crisis. These innovations show the immense potential for Scotland's knowledge economy. Yet once again, we see a lack of UK-wide investment in our research institutions as the Labour government prioritise elsewhere. This is the type of innovation that Scotland needs, and we need to continue in the future. Scotland's economic strength and Westminster's failure is ongoing. Under the SNP government, Scotland has seen record foreign direct investment outperforming the rest of the UK outside of London. We're leading the way in renewables, in life sciences and in data-driven innovation, and yet Westminster continues to hold Scotland back. Just look at the Chancellor's recent economic plans. They offer nothing for Scotland. They failed to replace the EU structural funds. They failed to deliver the promised £1 billion for carbon capture, and they failed to secure Grangemouth's future. No matter what Labour MSPs say in here today, they do fail to secure Grangemouth's future. These failures show that Labour is no different from the Tories when it comes to prioritising Scotland's needs. Presiding Officer, Scotland's economic success is not just a possibility, it's a certainty. If given the right tools and investment, we have the industries, the talent, the drive to build a fairer, greener and more prosperous nation. But to do that, we need a UK government that recognises Scotland's worth. The SNP will continue to fight for that fair balance. We will continue to push for that investment in Grangemouth, Glasgow Airport, UWS and all of Scotland's economic centres. And ultimately, we will continue to make the case that Scotland's best future lies with independence, where decisions about our economy are made here, in Scotland, for Scotland.
I now call Douglas Ross to be followed by Gordon MacDonald. Around 6 minutes, Mr Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This debate has been dreadful. I mean, truly awful. I mean, perhaps one of the worst, but to quote the Minister, that's quite a low bar. But just look around this chamber. I mean, we're calling it a debate. It's not really a debate. People are reading out their scripts, and everyone else has got their heads down. They've been doing emails, they've been reading correspondence, because there's not much enthusiasm for this motion. Not about the topic on the economy. I think we could have spoken about the economy today in a positive way, about how the two governments could work together. But no, we've got a motion that is couched in grievance, in an opportunity to take opposition against the UK government, rather than looking at what could be done more positively. And let's remember, this is Scottish Government debating time. So this is seen as an easy topic for government ministers to trot into the chamber to speak about, rather than some of the more important issues I think our constituents would like the chamber to be discussing today. It might not have been comfortable for the Scottish Government, but we could have had the Health Secretary here today speaking about issues of people in the North East waiting in an ambulance for 12 hours outside A&E. We could have had the Education Secretary in here with her team speaking about rising levels of violence in schools. We could have had the Transport Secretary in here speaking about a point I put to the Minister earlier on today about the A96 corridor review. Until my question this afternoon, we didn't know how many people had responded to that review or when the Government were going to outline their response to that. As Craig Hoy said in his intervention of the Minister, I will give way to the Minister in a moment, roads are so important to our economy, but we have the A96 connecting Aberdeen to Inverness, still not fully dual. The promise to do it by 2030, now an absolute fantasy. And I am absolutely certain that if the A96 ran between Glasgow and Edinburgh, it would have been fully dual now, but because it connects Inverness and Aberdeen, it is not. So I will give way to the Minister on that point.
Minister Richard Lockhead.
I know the member likes his soapbox and to chase local headlines, because I'm very familiar with that. But does he not think that it's important for the Scottish Parliament to discuss and debate the fact that the UK economic strategy, according to Rachel Reeves, is to build up London, Cambridge and Oxford? And do you not think in a few years, if that has happened, we'll look back and think perhaps we should have said a lot more about that and tried to stop it happening to the degree?
Douglas Ross.
The Minister should look behind him. It's not me he should be criticising about being slightly dismissive and despondent about this debate. Look at the empty SNP benches behind him. This is the governing party of Scotland, and they can't even be bothered to turn up to this debate because of the grievance that the Minister and the Scottish Government have put in this motion. And I don't know why he's suggesting I'm trying to grab a headline. I mean, it is a headline already that the SNP have failed to dual the A96. That has an impact on our local economy in Murray, in the Highlands and across the North East. Ministers may not like to listen to that, but it is the reality. But I also think we have to accept that there has been good working between the previous UK Conservative government and the SNP government here in Holyrood and the new Labour government. Now, I disagree with a lot of what the Labour government have done, but there has been the £200 million investment in Grangemouth. Prior to that, there was significant investment here in Scotland through the UK government. I remember the Murray Growth Deal, which I was part of as one of the local representatives at the time. When that was signed, it was the highest per head of population growth deal anywhere in the country. That was welcome funding coming from the UK Government, the Scottish Government and other bodies investing in the local economy. We had the levelling up funding of £18.2 million going from the UK Government to Murray Council for local projects, delivering in their area. And then we had the Elgin Towns Fund, something I was very proud to see announced a couple of years ago, £20 million for the Elgin Towns Fund. That is a huge amount of money, just in a few years, going to local authorities such as Murray, showing that there can be investment from both of Scotland's governments. Now, I was delighted that the Labour Government recently re-announced that. Interestingly, the town funds that they announced just last week or earlier on this week were the exact same towns that had been selected by the former Conservative Government on that. I'm delighted that Jenny Urquhart, who I suggested to chair the board for the Elgin Towns Fund, will continue in that role, working with local partners to see the local projects in Elgin really make a difference. But no Scottish Government minister can surely stand up and say that is not UK Government money coming to communities here in Scotland and actually delivering. That is what we should be celebrating. That is what we should be seeking more of. I will quickly give way.
Minister Tom Arthur.
I'm grateful to Mr Ross for giving way and certainly recognise the investment from the UK Government. As Regeneration Minister, I welcome that. I welcome the city deals. But I wonder if he would recognise in all seriousness one of the real strategic problems which successive UK governments have wrestled with for decades now is a significant imbalance. Now, I applaud London. It is a great city and it makes a significant contribution towards the UK, towards Europe, towards the global economy. But we do have a situation where we have appalling levels of regional inequality, variation in productivity across English regions and the nations. And while transfers are welcome, what is vital is creating new industries and economic opportunities in different parts right across the UK. And as such, when there's a real opportunity with these cutting-edge new technologies like AI, yes, take advantage of comparative advantage in places like Oxford and Cambridge, but that needs to be shared equitably right across the UK so the whole of the UK can prosper.
Douglas Ross, I can give you the time back for both those interventions.
I'm grateful, Presiding Officer. I agree with much of what the Minister has said there, but I would also gently say, just because the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer doesn't mention Scotland in a speech, doesn't mean Scotland is not going to get the benefits of much of these resources. And that's why I just think it's a bit petty to say, because Scotland didn't get mentioned here, or this bit didn't look at the north of the United Kingdom, it means it's not being considered. It clearly is. And we've seen investment from both the previous UK Conservative Government and this UK Labour Government into Scotland. But on the point of regional inequality, yes, I agree. Because as a representative of the Highlands and Islands and someone who lives in Murray, I do not believe this Scottish Government delivers for the whole of Scotland. I think it has a central belt bias and we are the poorer for it. In the North East, Richard Lochhead can laugh at that. But I go back to the fact that A96 has not been dualled. That was a promise made by successive SNP governments that has not been delivered. The fact that our maternity unit was downgraded in 2018 for 1 year and it is still downgraded and not a consultant-led unit. That is, again, inequality in Scotland, within the responsibilities of the Scottish Government, and that is what I would like to see change. And if we have debates on that, I think the Chamber will be fuller and we will be a better Parliament for it. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I now call Gordon MacDonald to be followed by Paul Kay in around 6 minutes. Mr MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And of course, investment in growing the Scottish economy is important for the future of our country. Two issues I want to mention. Firstly, Brexit. Post-Brexit, the UK Government introduced the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, meant to replace EU structural funds, including the European Regional Development Fund and the European Social Fund. EU funding that provided significant financial support to Scotland of around £100 million per year. However, the Shared Prosperity Fund has been widely criticised as inadequate for Scotland, as the funding is roughly 60% less than the EU equivalent. This gap is even more pronounced when considering additional programmes like LEADER and European Territorial Cooperation, which further bolstered rural and regional development under the EU framework. Once again, Scotland being let down by Westminster governments that promise much but deliver little. Then, just 15 months ago, the Tory Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Jack, issued a press release that began, "The UK Government's Levelling Up Fund in Scotland has now reached £2.92 billion. This included funding for the 12 city deals of £1.5 billion, up to the year 2034. As a member of the Economy Committee, we then heard from the Labour Secretary of State for Scotland, Ian Murray, in January that, and I quote, "At the moment, in terms of the money that is being put in, we have given the commitment to the 12-city region deals." But why use the words "at the moment"? Well, one reason may well be that the spending review due later this month is likely to include spending cuts, with many experts predicting significant reductions across government departments due to the current economic climate, defence spending increases and pressure to balance the budget. The so-called levelling up agenda, heralded with fanfare by the previous Tory administration, dangled a carrot of £2.9 billion for Scotland, funds meant to breathe life into our towns, regenerate our high streets and bolster our local economies. But it was not fully funded, as the Tories overpromised and Labour have so far under-delivered, leaving Scotland once again left picking up the pieces. Meanwhile, we get told by Ian Murray that major decisions have to wait until the spending review, at the same time as his Labour Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, announces plans to transform Oxford, Cambridge, London triangle into a major economic hub with investment in rail and road upgrades, research hospitals, digital tech investments, high levels of research funding into driving collaboration between Oxford, Cambridge and London universities, and a hub for life sciences. What happened to the inherited financial black hole, and awaiting the spending review outcome? Presiding Officer, I want to focus the remainder of my remarks on the broken promises relating to the exascale supercomputer at Edinburgh University. In the spring budget of 2023, it was announced that funding would be made available for the next generation AI computer. Edinburgh University was well placed, as they had just celebrated 60 years of computer science and artificial intelligence research. The university was already home to the country's current national supercomputer, Archer 2, and home to the UK's high-performance computing services for more than 30 years, and also a partner in the National Robotarium based in my constituency. Therefore, it was no great surprise when, on the 9th of October 2023, Edinburgh University issued a press release stating that the UK Government has announced the university as the preferred location for the exascale supercomputer, which will be able to perform 1 billion calculations each second. Once operational, it will provide high-performance computing capability for key research and industry projects across the UK. Exascale computer will be housed in a new £31 million wing of EPCC's Advanced Computing Facility, which has been purpose-built as part of the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal. But then on the 15th of January 25, Labour's Ian Murray stated at the Economy Committee that when we came into office, there was £900 million commitment to the University of Edinburgh for the exascale supercomputer, but there was not a penny attached to that commitment. Therefore, some difficult decisions had to be made. He then went on to say that the exascale computer issue has been rolled into the spending review. Then, less than 2 weeks later, on the 28th of January 25, the Labour government issued a press release stating Chancellor unveils new plans to deliver the Oxford-Cambridge growth corridor that will boost the UK economy, part of which was a new AI growth zone announced for Culham in Oxfordshire to speed up planning proposals and build more AI infrastructure. It then went on to say, and I quote, "This starts immediately, with work starting on a brand new supercomputer." Again, what happened to waiting for the March spending review, or does that only apply to Scotland? Then, on the 29th of January 25, the previous day's announcement was amended, removing the following sentence. The Chancellor today announced a call for expression of interest from regional and local authorities and industry to inform the next stage of AI Growth Zone programme. Why remove that sentence? Will Edinburgh University get that supercomputer? We don't know. But what I do know is that we do not need Westminster's crumbs dangled but then snatched away. We need control of our own resources, our own destiny. The SNP has long argued for independence. Let us decide how to level up our own communities, not wait on a Labour Chancellor in London to wield the red pen. My message to the UK Government is simple. Honour your commitments or step aside and let Scotland build the future our own people deserve.
I will now call the final speaker in the open debate, Paul O'Kane. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Today, of course, is Ash Wednesday, the first day of Lent, and I think I can chalk most of this afternoon up for my penance, which is useful. I do, however, welcome the opportunity to discuss the need for investment, both public and private, within Scotland to achieve the goals that I do think there is a consensus around across the Chamber on growth. And I think to have time this afternoon to set out much of the investment that has happened since July and the UK Labour Government's focus on that investment and the importance of that investment in relation to growth. And I'll begin by agreeing with at least part of the Government's motion, which is that there are high-growth sectors in Scotland, and there's scope for both those sectors as well and many others to go further and to go faster. And of course, our industries in fields such as energy, technology, whisky and manufacturing, to name just a few, indeed possess world-class innovation and the potential to drive significant economic growth for Scotland. I was struck by something George Adams said in response to me in the intervention, which was, let's leave the negativity to others. Well, it seems that his front bench didn't get that memo when they were developing the motion for this afternoon, because this is a Scottish Government debate. They choose the topic, of course, and the initial motion, and yet they have not included any details in that motion of real, tangible progress that the Scottish Government could be doing to attract greater investment into our economy, and they've failed to provide a pathway, I think, for meaningful action. Instead, it does seem to me like we are back to the same old grudge and grievance debate and motion in this place, where the Government throws up its hands if it feels like it's not getting exactly what it wants. And I thought that those days were behind us, because we were promised a new era of working together with the UK Government. So I think it's very disappointing to see this Government motion reacting to headline investments and ignoring, as usual, the detailed and significant investment that is coming to Scotland. And we've heard much of that this afternoon. Just today we had the announcement of that additional £55 million expansion of the port of Cromarty Firth, which will make the first port able to make offshore floating wind turbines on site and at scale in the UK, backed by a grant from the Floating Offshore Wind Manufacturing Investment Scheme, and allows it to attract that match funding from private investors. And that investment from Flowmouth now joins a long list of investments to Scotland, which I think it's worth hearing once again this afternoon, removing connectivity black holes through Project Gigabit and the Shared Rural Network, boosting 4G coverage in the Highlands and Islands, two electrolytic hydrogen projects in Cromarty and Whiteley, confirming £25 million of funding for the 10-year investment in the Argyll and Bute City Growth Deal, extending the innovation cluster in the Glasgow City region for a further year. And that's without mentioning those headline investments on Great British Energy, which I think is a clear investment and statement of intent with its headquarters in Aberdeen and the investment that goes along with it, and the £200 million committed by the Prime Minister. I'll just finish this point because I want to ensure we get the list completely on the record. The £200 million committed to by the Prime Minister for Grangemouth. I'll take Mr Stewart.
I thank Mr O'Kane for giving way, but the commitments to Aberdeen and to GB Energy have been diluted by the day. Up to 1,000 jobs was first said. Now, a couple of hundred jobs, maybe in 20 years. The investment has also been absolutely cut to pieces. So does Mr O'Kane believe that the pledges that were initially made to Aberdeen and the original GB Energy investment should stand?
Paul O'Kane, I can give you the time back.
It never fails to amaze me how Kevin Stewart cannot bring himself to support a publicly owned energy company that is being invested in by this new UK Government after years and years of inaction from the Tories and a lack of investment in that publicly owned company. Mr Stewart well knows the potential that will be unleashed for jobs in the supply chain, for jobs in the development of new offshore wind, for jobs in Aberdeen, which, as Michael Mara rightly described it, as the energy capital of the UK and of Europe. So I think it would be good to hear Mr Stewart come with that positivity that I think George Adam was looking for in his contribution. And I think it's important today that we don't lose sight that other parts of the UK have also faced chronic underinvestment for 14 years of Conservative austerity. And it was disappointing to hear the Minister talk about Liverpool and Tyneside as though those communities don't deserve investment and support from this new UK government. Indeed, I was speaking to someone today who was in Manchester, contrasting the growth and investment that has happened in Manchester with Andy Burnham as mayor, less powers in this place and less powers than this Parliament, but actually a huge amount of growth and development in those communities, working with those communities hand in hand. And yet we know that in Glasgow City region we've not seen anything similar to that sort of growth and expansion. And that was a point I made very clearly about Glasgow Airport, because I do agree that Glasgow Airport is a key part of our infrastructure, it's a key part of what we can do to get growth. But the fact of the matter is it was this SNP government who cancelled the Glasgow Airport rail link back in 2007 when they took office. So another proposal under SPT in order to develop a plan to bring light rail. I mean, the government has been in power for 18 years and you cannot get a train to Glasgow Airport. It really is extraordinary. So I think there has to be a bit of self-reflection from this government on the actions that they have taken, or the inactions rather, that they have taken. And we have to be honest that I'm just going to make this point and then I will allow Mr McMillan to intervene. The point on airports, I think, is well made. The expansions at Heathrow and Gatwick, which I think were tentatively welcomed by the First Minister, will actually have a knock-on impact in terms of the supply chain for our very important industries such as Scottish salmon. I'll take Mr McMillan.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank Paul O'Kane for taking intervention. Certainly the Garrel issue, but Mr O'Kane actually recognise and accept that Garrel would have had a negative effect upon people transporting between Inverclyde and also Glasgow, because it would have reduced the level of trains on an hourly basis if that had went ahead.
Paul O'Kane, again, I can give you the time back.
But I think those arguments were well rehearsed at the time, and I think what was abundantly clear, is this government abandoned Glasgow Airport. That's quite frankly what happened, and we've seen a lack of investment and support in Glasgow Airport. And I think it's disrespectful, actually, this debate and this motion this afternoon to the good partnership working that has taken place between the Scottish and UK governments over this past 7 months, which I think has been a constructive change and has sought to deliver for people and communities who need investment. And I'm thinking particularly around the partnership working we've seen around a sustainable future for Grangemouth, for the Grangemouth Industrial Cluster and the wider Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal. So I think we have to be clear this afternoon that the UK Labour government is taking sometimes very difficult and tough economic decisions, making investments that are necessary after what has been a lost decade in Scotland's economy, whilst the SNP and the Tories seem to want to continue this story of grudge and grievance, and I don't think that does a service to the people of Scotland indeed. I think it's clear that the job is not done. And as I've said in my speech this afternoon, you cannot rectify a lost decade after simply 7 months in office. But it has been a very significant start made by this new UK government. I referenced earlier in my speech the disappointment of a return to grudge and grievance through this motion, in spite of significant cooperative work undertaken by the two governments. So I think it is important that the government reflect on that. I hope that this is a momentary blip in terms of the constructive relationship and the debates that we have in this chamber, and the government must reflect on that. I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane. We move to closing speeches. There's a little time in hand, so I call Lorna Slater, generous 6 minutes. Ms Slater.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Like Murdos Fraser, up until just this last speech, I think had been enjoying having another debate on economy, although my staff have forbidden me from rolling out my meatloaf joke again. I am a bit distressed by that last speech because of its focus on airports. We are a long way into the climate emergency for members of the Chamber not to understand the role that aviation is playing in global climate emissions, nor the status of aviation in the future. Aviation is one of those industries that must decline. Yes, the Climate Change Committee says there will always be some role for aviation, but this is not a growth industry, and therefore investing in airports is not a sensible thing to do, except if it is in decarbonising and shrinking those airports. I also cannot agree with Craig Hoy in his intervention on Kevin Stewart. He seemed to be implying that people in the financial services sector aren't very good at maths. The Chartered Institute of Taxation has calculated that someone earning the whopping salary of £150,000 in Scotland will pay £3,857 £88 more in income tax in Scotland, less than 3% of their gross salary. In exchange for this, they would get a baby box if they had a baby, free prescriptions, free bus travel for their kids, free university tuition for their kids, more police officers per person, a greater ratio of GPs per person, free social care should they or any of their family require it, and although not something the Scottish Government can take credit for, with or without the Greens in government, significantly lower housing costs. Anyone who ran the numbers on that would find living in Scotland a really good deal. John Cullinane, the Director of Public Policy at the Chartered Institute of Taxation, notes that the diversion created by devolution, I'll try that again. The divergence created by devolution has not led to any noticeable changes in taxpayer behaviour. I'm also going to challenge Murdo Fraser on free ports. They are an excellent example of exactly the sort of compromises that end up getting made in the pursuit of growth at all costs. Within a free port, some amount of taxes and regulations are suspended in the hopes that companies who don't want to contribute to their country and their communities, who have a cavalier attitude to regulations, can be lured into these locations. Even assuming that this leads to the creation of new companies rather than just causing businesses to relocate, what message does this send out to companies who do pay their employees properly and who follow the rules and who do pay their taxes? It makes it sound like the Conservatives don't value them. And instead of creating a level playing field for all businesses, the Conservatives would like to hand out sweeties to companies who don't want to pay their taxes and who don't want to follow regulations. I would also challenge, again, this claim that North Sea oil and gas contributes to Scotland's energy security. North Sea oil and gas is extracted by private companies and sold on the open global market. It is in no way reserved for or set aside for Scotland's use. Far from creating security for us, climate change creates significant risks for our future. Everything from food shortages, species extinctions, storm impacts, flooding, fires and droughts will increase if global emissions don't drop quickly enough. If emissions don't drop quickly enough, large parts of Earth will become uninhabitable to humanity. The mass human displacement this causes, along with global food and water shortages, is an enormous risk to our security. Security of our future depends on us reducing emissions on a very rapid trajectory. I am, as always, a bit concerned about the Scottish Government's focus on carbon capture and storage and ACORN. They appear to be looking for an easy way out of the climate emergency. We know what is needed to reduce emissions urgently, and nearly all of it includes proven technology that we already have. But instead of implementing road charging, announcing a road building moratorium, as Wales has done, instead of bringing forward an ambitious heat and buildings bill, or publishing their new energy strategy with a clear presumption against new oil and gas, the Scottish Government point to the UK and the ACORN project again and again. CCUS is a very risky investment. Even if it can be made to work, and no one's done that yet, it is frightfully expensive. It lets polluters off the hook by imagining they can just hoover up their emissions instead of us all having to make significant changes to how our economy works. I'm going to conclude by joining Kevin Stewart, Michael Mara and others in calling out the explicitly political and constitutional nature of the motion for this debate. With Scottish independence being supported by roughly half of the population of Scotland, the UK government, which is so fanatically unionist that they are refusing to defend the union in a new referendum on Scottish independence, instead maintaining the Tory line that if they don't allow a democratic process of self-determination for the Scottish people, that we'll all just forget about it and it will go away. So the UK government is in a bit of a bind. If they invest in Scotland, they risk stoking Scottish economic confidence and therefore confidence in what an independent Scotland might achieve, and that undermines Project Fear. But if they don't invest in Scotland, they risk stoking Scottish resentment, allowing those of us who support independence to say how much better off we'd be as an independent country. Climate change unchecked will force changes into our economy. We can either make changes in how our economy works to ensure that everyone benefits from our success, to reduce emissions, or we will have changes forced upon us by the collapse of global systems, climate, food production, precipitation patterns, disease and extreme events. This isn't optional. You might want to opt out of the costs and difficult choices of achieving net zero, but you can't opt out of the costs and effects of catastrophic climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Michael Marra, again around 6 minutes. Mr.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. There is, of course, a very important debate to be had about spatial economics in the UK and, of course, in Scotland. Unfortunately, this was not it. We've been slightly bedevilled by the motion in front of us by the government, and also the tone taken variously by, rather depressingly by the front bench, but rather hysterically by the backbenches of the SNP, and some of the quite fantastical warblings that we've had of grievance, grudge and, frankly, an aggressive tone about anything that happens good anywhere else rather than in Scotland. It's not one that I think builds a kind of atmosphere of partnership which we hope to actually see and can actually help the whole of the country. And I would say that one area that could have been a focus today in terms of the kind of issues that talk about the genuine investment in our economy is Scotland. So in 2022, the Scotland auction realised £756 million in fees. The then First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said that Scotland money, and I quote, will help deliver the supply chain investments in high-quality jobs that will make the climate transition a fair one. So precisely none of that has happened, Presiding Officer, 3 years on. The money has shifted in and out of budgets over the years, becoming, frankly, a fund to be used as a backstop for an increasingly chaotic government that is losing control of the public finances with 3 consecutive emergency in-year budgets. An announcement in the 25-26 budget that around £300 million will be spent on long-term investment for the energy transition, the kind of investment that Kevin Stewart was calling for. But yesterday at Finance Committee, the Finance Minister couldn't tell me a single project that any of that money would actually be spent on within the next financial year when it's meant to be invested. So how the government will use that money to invest in our energy future remains a complete mystery, including to the government, and the clock is ticking. So this is the kind of area that the government could have been talking about today, things that, frankly, they need to get in order. No, thank you. And no, thank you. No, thank you. So we strode bizarrely after that across a range of cod economic theorising, none worse, I have to say, than the frankly bizarre Malthusian fantasies of Kevin Stewart, recalling the worst warblings of physical resource constraint based on, frankly, pre-technological views of the world. So for all his railing against Empire and the East India Company, his view is, frankly, profoundly ahistorical and is, frankly, irrelevant to the people of the North East and to Scotland today. What they want to know is what this money will actually be spent upon. I certainly will, sir.
Kevin Stewart, and through the chair, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think what is entirely relevant to the people of the North East and throughout Scotland is that capital spending difference. That per capita spending on capital of £2,237 in London compared to £1,789 in Scotland. That is of the Treasury's making, and London sucks up capital.
Michael Marra.
And I think that Mr Stewart makes, as I said at the outset, there is a fair point at the core of his issue there in terms of actually the investment on a spatial basis. We've heard the example given by my friend Paul Kane about Manchester, and Andy Burnham is a frequent and loud campaigner for investment in his region. The question is whether you want to do that in partnership and try and actually deal with some of those. What has happened in the most recent budget is there's an additional £610 million of capital being invested by the UK Labour government in Scotland, but we have no capital plan as to tell us how it's going to be spent. We were promised one for the last 2 years. years, and as the investment cost of that rises, we have none the wiser as to how any of the money should be spent. Lorna Slater went on to tell us that growth isn't everything, although I'm afraid I don't believe that anyone actually claimed that it was. But Ms Slater rightly refers to distributional questions and inequality, but I fail to see, and I continue to fail to see, the relationship between an end to growth and the political means by which you can find the space to redistribute that money. I think that it's a singular failure in Tim Jackson's work in the end to growth, if I'm honest. Of course, as part of that, the question of the spatial question is that we are all advocates here for place and for local people, and which we are all rightly passionate and positive about. And I thought that Beatrice Wishart gave, frankly, the best example of this, and she will be a sad loss to Parliament in 2026. She gave the best examples of the centralising tendency of this government. And she could have given the same speech that SNP backbenchers gave, that money spent anywhere other than where they want it to be is an illegitimate affront. George Adam claimed that the £200 million for Grangemouth is, and I quote, nothing. An insult, frankly, to the local people who have campaigned for jobs and investment. And in his view, the people of Manchester should have no investment whatsoever. Yes, sir.
Briefly, George Adam.
I don't know if the member's intentionally misinterpreting what I said or is just doing it for political effect, but what I was questioning was the rights of actually giving £1 billion to someone who is already destroying the lives of people in Grangemouth. That was the thing. That's what the people of Grangemouth want to do. And we don't know what the £200 million is actually going to do, where it comes from, what it's going to deliver.
Michael Mara.
Let's get some balance on this debate here in reality.
I'm happy to defend the idea that after 8 months, the UK Labour government brings £200 million to the table to invest in that local community, when this government sat on its hands for 18 years and did absolutely nothing. But Beatrice Wishart continued by giving that articulate case for her community rather than against other communities. And I'll close on a quote from Beatrice. She said that it would be better, frankly, for people to bring a can-do and enterprising attitude, identifying where the future lies. If only, sir, if only.
Thank you very much. I now call on Craig Hoy, around 7 minutes. Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This grim, grievance-laden debate has underscored just how wide the gap is between the SNP's rhetoric and reality when it comes to Scottish business, the Scottish economy and Scottish growth. And it goes to say something that, having put her name to this lamentable motion, Kate Forbes stayed for the first 5 minutes of this debate and then ducked out to spend her time more productively. Because if she had remained in here, she would have learnt more about the SNP's record, a record that my colleague Murdo Fraser did not on this occasion take the opportunity to eviscerate. But it does reveal that it is not the UK that treats the Scottish economy as an afterthought. It is indeed, and bizarrely, the Scottish Government, the SNP Government, that repeatedly does. Now, I accept the Minister's point that Labour has badly let down Scottish business and has all but snuffed out the prospects of growth that we had restored to the Scottish economy. But it is more than just a bit rich for the SNP to use this debate to slam anyone else for treating Scottish trade and Scottish industry as an afterthought. Because let's take a moment or two to reflect on the SNP's record. The oil and gas sector in Scotland repeatedly hung out to dry. Scotland's pub and hospitality sector given only a tiny share of the vital rates relief it's due. Scotland's retailers given no additional rates relief at all. Our farmers seeing the agricultural resource budget cut this year. Our fishing communities crying out for support that isn't forthcoming. The Scottish nuclear energy industry, or what's left of it, facing shutdown to SNP dogma. The defence manufacturing industry losing jobs due to a lack of Scottish Government support. The financial services sector in Scotland, where recruitment is put at risk by John Swinney's High Tax Scotland. And I say to Kevin Stewart that we are not losing financial services jobs to London. We are losing financial services jobs to Manchester, to Birmingham, to Newcastle and other places in England. And that is the reality of the situation. Our universities are being undermined as engines of innovation and economic growth by SNP disinvestment over a decade and more. the Scottish whisky industry is facing repeated threats, such as the proposed ban on marketing. Our world-class food and drink sector hit hard by the failed deposit return scheme that Lorna Slater still defends. Scotland's free ports delayed as the SNP played political games. Globally recognised Brand Scotland brewers who are now scratching their heads in disbelief at proposed restrictions on sponsorship. Our island businesses undermined by the ongoing ferries failure. Our remote and rural businesses, some as large as Stenalink in Stranraer, hit by this government's failure to upgrade roads such as the A75. Now, as Douglas Ross said, this has been a lamentable debate, and I will never get the 9 minutes back that I had to listen to Kevin Stewart, because this SNP government, and nothing I heard today tells me otherwise, is actively hostile to many of the very industries that they rely on for Scotland's skills development, employment and the tax receipts that they rely on. And when the SNP talk about economic growth, their actions in this place and beyond so often run completely counter to achieving it. And despite Michael Mara's flight of fantasy, I accept that Labour are no better. The party's national insurance hike, which, let's admit it, is a broken promise tax on jobs and on workers, will cost the Scottish economy billions of pounds. It will lead to lower wages, lower levels of employment, and it will undermine companies' capacity to invest further in growing their businesses. But let's recap, as Murdo Fraser did, on the performance of the Scottish economy in recent years under a Conservative government in what were challenging economic times. Between 2011 and 2022, the economy grew by nearly a fifth, yet Scottish growth lagged this by 7%. The Scottish economy was underperforming what was perceived to be an underperforming UK economy. That is the true cost of the SNP's economic incompetence and their policy decisions. But had ministers got their act together and swung in behind Scotland businesses, the economy would now be £10.2 billion bigger than it is at the moment. Now, in this budget, we set out plans to reduce tax on workers, tax on home buyers and tax on businesses, and that would have restored long-term growth to the Scottish economy. But it fell on deaf ears with this SNP government, and it appears that Labour lacks a credible plan too, as this debate has proven, where I think Labour has in many respects been defending indefensible decisions taken that are doing real damage to the business community and to public services here in Scotland. Deputy Presiding Officer, the last Conservative government was serious about boosting the Scottish economy, serious to the tune of £3 billion. As Murdo Fraser said, £1.5 billion in city, region and growth deals, £1.4 billion in levelling up, including the free ports that the SNP sought to block, and also which would have supported jobs in key industries, including in the oil and gas sector, where it would have acted as a supply chain. But it's not just in those areas where the Scottish Conservatives backed the UK government in delivering for Scotland. As Murdo Fraser rightly said, the Ministry of Defence spends more per head in Scotland than the rest of the UK, an average of £380 higher, and the Ministry of Defence spending in Scotland grew 13% between 2018 and 2022. That was the vote of confidence in the Scottish aerospace and defence industries. And as our motion makes clear, we shouldn't ignore some of the significant contributions made by other organisations. The British Business Bank's Investment Fund for Scotland will be delivering £150 million of new funding to the country to drive sustainable growth by supporting innovation and creating local opportunity for new and growing businesses in Scotland. There was, I believe, under a Conservative government, action delivering real support for Scottish investment in Scottish business, for Scottish jobs and ultimately for growth in the Scottish economy. Our commitment to the Scottish economy and to the industries that support it is unwavering and ambitious. Sadly, based on our experience, not just in this debate but in many recent debates, is that the SNP and now Labour do not believe in the same principles of driving growth in the Scottish economy.
Thank you. I now call on Richard Lochhead to wind up the debate. Minister, I'd be grateful if you could take us to as close to 5 o'clock as you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I shall speak slowly and, of course, welcome any interventions that members want to bring forward. I always like to hear from members and their views, and I'm sure they're thinking of what they can say already. I think, firstly, it's just important to say, and I said this at the beginning, actually, that we are debating the future of the Scottish economy and, indeed, to a certain extent, the future of the UK economy against a backdrop of challenges and uncertainties. Domestically, there's a lot of concern in the business community over the impending increase in national insurance contributions. There's the energy costs, there's the inflation, there's the ongoing impact of Brexit. There's a whole range of issues. Internationally, of course, the situation is also quite uncertain, and we've seen on our TV screens and in social media what's been happening across the pond and the ramifications of that. And we don't quite know where that's going to go, and I'm sure every single member from across all the parties is very concerned about that. And indeed the Scottish business community, the UK business community, likewise will be very concerned about the potential impact of what may be down the line over the coming months and years. We simply don't know at this point. The reason why I mention this is simply because I think that makes this kind of debate even more important. Because we have to absolutely grasp the economic opportunities before us. We cannot afford to miss them. We are at a moment of inflection for the Scottish economy. I'm very lucky in my post. I get to go around the country and meet businesses and entrepreneurs and the universities and a wide range of representatives of the business community. There's a lot of excitement at the moment, despite those challenges. There's a lot of wells about to sprout in the business community and innovation community, really exciting things happening in Scotland. We cannot afford to miss this moment of inflection. The decisions we take over the next few years will lead to that giant prize being captured I mentioned of prosperity and more equality in Scotland, or if we take the wrong decisions or if other people take the wrong decisions, we will miss some of those opportunities. So I think it's actually a very crucial time for Scotland, and I think that makes this debate even more important.
Murdo Fraser.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. On that very note, he will recall I referenced at the start of this debate the importance of the defence industries to Scotland. And we're going to see more defence spending in the UK and internationally. That creates an economic opportunity. Does he therefore agree with me that the Scottish Government has to be welcoming of the defence industries? And does he agree with me that if on a future occasion we welcome the defence sector and young apprentices in the defence sector to this Parliament, we should be welcoming them and not abusing them?
Minister.
Well, I'd like to put on record I very much value the contribution to the Scottish economy of the companies in the defence sector based in Scotland. There's a diverse range of companies, from building naval ships to drones or other technologies that are being used or whatever. And of course, the space industry in Scotland is crucially important. And as the world prepares to invest billions and billions of extra dollars into the space industry, I think there's opportunities for Scotland to get a slice of that action as well, and that will lead to high-value jobs in our country and the further expansion of our space industry. We shouldn't limit our ambitions to small satellites, which we're very good at, and some of the rockets we're building. We have to look at the global situation, what that means for Scottish opportunities. So I think the apprentices and the opportunities for not just for defence but diversification within those companies is important for the Scottish economy. In terms of this debate, I would say that in many ways it's been quite predictable. Firstly, the Conservatives have said that things were much better in their day. Labour Party have said things are much better now because they're in government. Douglas Ross says he doesn't want to be here, so we all know that, and he gave us his view on things as well. And I suppose I'll have to give way since I name-checked him.
Douglas Ross.
It's not so much that. The Minister said he would be happy to give way to any colleagues, so I'm taking him up on his point. Does he accept my issue was more about the structure of this debate? I'm happy to speak about the economy, but as he's saying this was very predictable, we knew how this debate would go because of how the SNP framed the motion for debate today. Surely he must agree, having listened to the debate, we could have had a positive and constructive debate about Scotland's economy. We couldn't do it with his motion.
Minister.
I have to say to the member, if he should be aware of this, that occasionally we disagree over the future direction of the Scottish and UK economy, and today we're having a vigorous debate on that very subject, and we've got our views on the future of the Scottish economy, and other parties are here defending their views on the future of the Scottish economy as well. But I think it is important we address the big picture. The big picture is the Chancellor of the Exchequer for the UK Government has said that she sees the Golden Triangle, London, Oxford, Cambridge, and particularly the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, as the key to economic success for the UK. She also views that as the home of British innovation. that has huge ramifications for our business community in Scotland. And I know other members would rather not talk about that, but honestly, if my party had plummeted to 18% in opinion polls, I perhaps would be asking myself why the people of Scotland get certain views of the UK government at the moment. So I think it is important to reflect on what's happening with the big picture. I met Douglas Alexander last week. We both spoke at an exports event in Edinburgh called Made in Scotland, Selling to the World. We cooperate over issues like that. We've discussed in this debate how we've cooperated over free ports, how there's other funding coming to Grangemouth from the multi-billion National Wealth Fund. The £200 million have been earmarked for Grangemouth. We've discussed the growth deals and how the governments have worked together there as well as a good example. I don't understand why the other parties are trying to conflate a Scottish Government willingness to work in partnership with the UK Government with the fact that we've got concerns over the UK Government direction of travel in promoting the South East of England.
Michael Mara.
I appreciate the Minister giving way. He will recognise that some of what we instead got from the backbenches was talk of what happened in Empire and the East India Company as an illustration of where, unfortunately, the motion took us. But I would say that in terms of the contributions of speeches made by UK Government ministers, just draw attention to what the Prime Minister said just last week when he was announcing the £200 million for Grangemouth, about how integral Scotland is to our ambition to have a clean power mission to transform the energy sector by 2030. It is the energy capital of Europe, and it's integral to those plans, and it will be invested against on that basis. Now, surely he sees that that is a positive signal about the UK Labour Government's view and vision for Scotland.
Minister.
Firstly, I think we recognise that in some cases, of course, UK money is coming to Scotland investment, and that's important. But what the member's talking about is UK projects, and we should be thankful and celebrating the fact that Scotland's got a share of these UK projects. Of course, we should be getting a share of those projects. But we're talking about the big picture here in terms of the direction of travel for the UK economy, and Kevin Stewart actually made a very important point, which was about inequality and how we're repeating past mistakes. And the UK Labour Government are once again putting an emphasis on the Golden Triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London and the South East of England to drive forward the UK economy. Now, even the Tories who introduced the Levelling Up agenda accepted, albeit it was 10 years late before they introduced that Levelling Up agenda, accepting was a problem. They accepted too much was happening in the Golden Triangle and South East of England. So it may have turned out just to be a bit of a slogan, but it did identify a debate to be had in the UK. But now the Labour Party have come in, talking about how the Tories got this wrong, and they're doing exactly the same. You're talking up the Golden Triangle as the future of where investment should be going for the UK.
Paul O'Kane.
Throughout the course of the debate, and I made this point directly to the Minister in my contribution, he himself referenced investment in Liverpool, in Tyneside, in Manchester. We had that debate played out before us. Does he not see that a lost decade can't be overturned in 7 months, but investment in every part of the UK is vitally important and at the core of this government's agenda?
Minister.
Yes, but what's causing concern in the Scottish business community is the thrust of UK economic policy. Rachel Reeves said, and it was reported to the BBC, that she vowed to build Europe's Silicon Valley between Oxford and Cambridge. Even Terry Murden of Daily Business News, not the biggest friend of the Scottish Government, it's got to be said, even his article about the speech said southern comfort but no help for Scotland. Now, the issue here is that the embassies around the world, the UK agencies, all take their lead from what the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Prime Minister say. And what they've said is drive the investment into the Golden Triangle in the South East of England. So that's what will be happening behind closed doors around the world. Thank goodness we've got Kate Forbes as our champion of investment in Scotland. We've got the efforts been put in by the Scottish Government to attract investment in Scotland. I went on a trade mission to Singapore. Do you know what the Singapore senior business person I spoke to said to me? He said it's refreshing to have a Scottish minister here arguing for investment in Scotland, because usually we get UK ministers arguing for us to invest in the Golden Triangle in the south of England. So that's what's happening around the world, and they're taking their nod from that policy direction.
What does he say then to the investor panel commissioned by the Scottish Government, who said it is not apparent that the Scottish Government considers the impact of its actions on investment appetite? They said planning decisions are slow and sit in the system for unacceptably long periods. This is what the business community are saying to his government about their record. Why aren't we not having the discussion about that and actually fixing it?
Minister. I can pull the member back to the big picture again. I know that planning is important for the Scottish business community, and it's really important we get that right and listen to those recommendations. But what we're talking about here is the future direction of the UK economy and the implications for Scotland. And that's what we've got to have at our heart. So when the Prime Minister stands up and speaks about the AI action plan, despite the fact that Scotland's internationally in the lead in many areas of AI, And he doesn't mention Scotland, but he mentions all 4 parts of down south in terms of his overall big speech about the future of AI in the UK. That's why our business community and our innovation sectors are concerned, because they're reading this, they're seeing this. We need a UK government that recognises what's happening in Scotland. People write books about how Scotland invented the modern world, but meanwhile the UK government are cancelling the supercomputer for Edinburgh, at the same time as mentioning every other part of the UK, or at least England, talking about the future of AI, despite the fact that the Nobel Prize winner just last year won his award. He's an alumni of Edinburgh University, and he won his award for machine learning. He's involved in AI. He learned at Edinburgh University, one of the world's leaders in AI. This has to be recognised by the UK government. We have to do something about this. And of course, if you are in one of the many exciting companies that are often quoted in this chamber in Scotland, whether it's in life sciences, whether it's in the space industry, whether it's in fintech, wherever it is, and you're reading the UK government's official view is that Oxbridge, the Golden Triangle, is the home of British innovation, how do you think they feel? How do you think they feel? They're literally inventing cures for diseases. They're inventing new technology for space to make us work our planet properly and protect us and give us the best data possible. That's all been invented and developed and innovated here in Scotland. And then your Chancellor of the Exchequer, apologies, the Labour Party's Chancellor of the Exchequer, stands up and says in her big speech on the future of the UK economy that Oxbridge is the home of British innovation. Yep. That is unacceptable. We have to get that fixed, and we need the UK government to stand up for Scotland, to represent us around the world, work in partnership with us, and not drive UK policy, UK resources and time and effort into the south east of England and promote even more inequality and not allow Scotland to realise our economic ambitions. We will do our bit here in Scotland, but it's about time the Labour Party started doing their bit as well. I commend the motion to Parliament.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on achieving a fair balance in the UK's economy. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 16686 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 16686 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of 6 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 16687 to 16691 on approval of SSIs and 16692 on designation of a lead committee.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And the question on these motions will be put at decision time, and there are 4 questions to be put as a result of today's business. Can I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Murdo Fraser is agreed to, the amendment in the name of Daniel Johnson will fall. And the first question is that amendment 16667.3 in the name of Murdo Fraser, which seeks to amend motion 16667 in the name of Kate Forbes on achieving a fair balance in the UK's economy, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote. And there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.